Hello, my name is Karen Knabel. I'm with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, and I am with the Mercury Education and Reduction Campaign. Today I'm going to talk to you about Vermont's standards for the management of mercury-containing bulbs or lamps. You will hear both of those terms in this presentation. They mean the same thing. We are going to talk about proper management for businesses who generate mercury-containing bulbs and store them on site until they're recycled, for collectors of mercury-containing bulbs from Vermont residents, everything from a hardware store to a solid waste district. Those management standards are all the same. First, I'm going to talk to you about Vermont's laws. Vermont was the second state in the nation to pass any legislation related to mercury-added products. That legislation required products that contain mercury to be labeled before they could be sold into the state. That label had to indicate that it contained mercury in some way, and also that it was banned from landfill disposal. Later on, a law was passed requiring manufacturers of those same bulbs to develop a mercury lamp collection program for the collection, transportation, and recycling of those bulbs. That program had to be no cost to consumers and no cost to the collectors who were collecting it on their behalf for recycling. Now let's talk about the labeling just a little bit. Vermont was the first state to mandate that bulb manufacturers label their bulb identifying that it contained mercury. That agreement was that the bulb had to have the symbol Hg in a circle. Hg is the symbol on the periodic table of elements that identifies the element mercury. Along with that symbol, some bulbs had additional labeling such as contains mercury, dispose according to local, state, or federal law, or a symbol that was a crossed out wheelie bin that also identified that it could not be placed in the trash. Now let's talk about the manufacturer-funded program. In most programs that are funded by manufacturer, there are two components. One is who is covered by the program, in other words, who can bring in the product, and what is covered. In this case, the covered entity is anyone who resides in the state or has a residence in the state or a business in the state. No limit to CFLs, and the bulbs in the photo below are all CFL fluorescent bulbs. There is no limit to the number of these that a covered entity, which is anyone in the state basically, can bring into one of the collection facilities. So there are also other bulbs other than CFLs that are covered by the program. All of these in the picture are covered by the program. However, there is a limit of 10 per person per day when you take the bulbs to a collection site. Notice on the left, HID lamps. High intensity discharge. Those can be mercury vapor, metal halide, high pressure sodium. In the center, linear tubes, 2 foot, 4 foot, and 8 foot. U-tube lamps on the upper right, and circular lamps. These are all covered by the program, but a limit of 10 per person per day. Non-program bulbs, which means not collected for free. Manufacturers fund the collection of the bulbs that we've already talked about. CFL bulbs and the linear, U-tube, HID bulbs, circuline bulbs, those types of mercury-containing bulbs. However, the law specifically identifies that that program is not required to collect mercury bulbs that are neon, tanning bed lamps, lamps used for medical, UV, industrial, specialty, disinfection, or treatment bulbs are not covered by the program, meaning that some solid waste facilities might accept these bulbs, but not at no charge under the manufacturer's program. Notice the last bullet. Anyone that brings in more than 10 non-CFL bulbs would also be considered non-covered program bulbs because there's a limit of 10. Then, of course, since this is a mercury bulb program, non-mercury bulbs would not be covered, such as incandescent, LED, halogen, or quartz. Let's talk about more management standards for bulbs. Mercury-containing bulbs are considered universal waste. So even if you're a business or if you're a collector, they all must be managed the same way. All mercury bulbs are banned from landfill disposal. So they can't be placed in the regular trash. Even if they're broken, they cannot be placed in the regular trash. Crushing of mercury-containing bulbs is not allowed in Vermont. When a bulb breaks, mercury vapor is released into the environment. However, mercury can still be bound up in the phosphor in the lamp and also on the glass. Crushing releases the mercury vapors that may pose health and environmental risks. Some states allow crushing as a method of disposal, but not in Vermont. Broken bulbs, once they're broken, they are considered a hazardous waste and they're managed very differently. Another standard for bulbs is they must be managed in a way to prevent breakage, and they can't be taped together. These photos are prime examples how to not manage bulbs or lamps. You don't want to stage them if you're a collection facility, and if you're a business, take your bulbs in as frequently as possible. Packaging. You must immediately package a bulb in a structurally sound box that will prevent breakage, and it needs to be sized so that the bulb fits down into the box, because the box needs to remain closed except for when you're putting more bulbs into the box. Let's talk about incidental breakage. Incidental breakage is a policy that was put together by Department of Environmental Conservation to reduce mercury exposure to workers primarily. When you have a broken mercury device or lamp, you never ever want to vacuum it or sweep it. That is just making more mercury vapor available to the environment and ruining your vacuum cleaner. If a bulb breaks while you are placing it into a collection container, you want to immediately close that container and ready it for shipment, no matter how full the box is. One thing you really want to think about when it comes to a mercury spill is to ventilate. For 15 minutes, if possible, isolate the area so people don't track through it, and clean up the spill. If you have additional questions on cleaning up a mercury spill, go to www.mercvt.org. There is a video on the website and other fact sheets on how to clean up mercury spills. Now let's talk about storage. Storage of mercury-containing lamps, of course, need to be in a container, and that container needs to be within a structure to keep it out of the elements and to keep it dry. You do not want to stack containers or boxes higher than 5 feet, and the reason for that is to keep the bottom boxes from crushing from the weight. You want to store them away from floor traffic so no one bumps them off and breaks more lamps. You want to tape the boxes closed when they're full, and don't store longer than 1 year. And we'll talk about how to show that on the box later on. So as we said, these lamps or these bulbs are universal waste. Now we talk about bulbs and we talk about lamps, and those are terms that are interchangeable. Lamps is an industry term, and usually we talk about light bulbs. Let's talk about labeling of universal waste. Any device that is considered a universal waste has to have two things. One, it needs to have the contents identified, and two, it needs to show on the container that you have not stored any universal waste for longer than 1 year. For identifying the contents on a universal waste label for bulbs, you can say used lamps, universal waste lamps, or waste lamps. You also want to date the box to identify when you put the first bulb into a box so that you can show that you haven't had that stored for longer than 1 year on site. And if you don't have a universal waste label, you don't have to use a universal waste label. You can simply write what's needed right on the container. You can write use lamps, universal waste lamps, or waste lamps, and the date. If you notice on the program boxes on the right, the white boxes are already pre-labeled universal waste lamps. If you have other boxes that are not program bulbs, if someone was to bring in 100 bulbs, that would not be covered by the program because there's a limit of 10 if they were linears. Then you would put them into their own container and make sure that they had some sort of labeling. It could be a universal waste label like this one, which is an example that has a checkbox for universal waste lamps. Notice there's also an accumulation date on that label. For the program boxes, there is a space where you can identify the accumulation date. Notice the types and counts on this box. Those are no longer required by the program. You only need the date for the management standards for universal waste. Last, if you collect program lamps and you collect other lamps that are not covered by the program, and we've talked about those, you need to keep those separate. This facility does a good job of doing that so that they can keep track when the recycler comes as to who gets what. Again, my name is Karen Knable. I am with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. If you have any questions about mercury, I'm your contact. I am at 802-522-5736. There is my name at vermont.gov and the website that has a lot of resources. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. Have a good day.